The blast doors were already descending. The alarms had switched from warning to finality. And the human stepped forward, not to escape, but to stop the door with his hands. Behind the glass, the alien screamed. 27 seconds earlier, everything had been normal. Platform J, 6 of the Tonneris Interstellar Transit Nexus, buzzed with its usual quiet complexity. Graceful insectoid diplomats gliding through air-cushioned lanes, hydromechs bubbling their transit signals, carbon-based bipeds and silicon-shelled traders alike, filtering through customs with practiced apathy. The great lattice ceiling pulsed with starfield reflections, echoing a station built to inspire awe through order. Then came the drop. Not in gravity, Tonneris had compensators that could hold stable through a hull breach, but in air pressure. Subtle at first, just enough for sensitive membranes to tense or translucent ears to twitch. The change registered as a ripple through species whose bodies could feel the shift before machines could. 4 seconds later, sensors caught up. A structural compromise in subvent. A9 triggered code blue. Containment protocols cascaded through systems older than most of the sapients on board. Panels flashed amber, then red. Atmospheric purifiers slammed into emergency isolation. A voice, smooth and multilingual, announced, "Transit anomaly detected. Emergency evacuation initiating. Please proceed to shelter corridors." The announcement lasted 3 seconds. By then, pressure readings had already spiked into terminal variants. At corridor H4 Delta, the automated system made its decision: isolate the breach. That corridor's environmental integrity was suspect. Its occupants, regrettable variables. Blast doors began to fall. They were thick, pressure-sealed monoliths, not doors so much as mobile walls. Driven by kinetic hammers, resistant to fusion plasma, capable of full lock in under 5 seconds. The aliens near H4 Delta scattered, some diving into side corridors, others tripping over each other in the sudden haze of panic. Bright green fog coiled from failing air conduits, a marker gas designed to highlight atmosphere differentials. Behind the doors, inside the corridor, 5 beings remained. 2 were Greltic delegates, dense-bodied, low-slung, and too slow to match the evacuation route's curvature. 1 was a juvenile Asgan, whose flotation sac had begun to deflate from the pressure change. Another was a worker-class Tillich, clutching a data crate like it was a limb. And the last was a Terran technician male, maybe 35, medium build, no visible augmentations. Elias Moreno. He didn't know any of their names. He barely understood what had gone wrong. 1 second, he was checking a calibration node on a diagnostic panel. The next, emergency shutters slammed behind him, and warning lights strobed in sickly red. Then he saw the door coming down. His first thought wasn't technical. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't even rational. It was the Askin's eyes' huge, fluid-filled lenses, blinking in disoriented panic as the corridor sealed. She had hesitated, turned the wrong way. The others had too, and the station system had made its choice. He moved. From the viewing bay behind reinforced glass, safety officers were already logging the loss. To the system, the corridor was lost. The beings inside were lost. The doors had to close. Hull integrity came first. The evacuation algorithm had reviewed every path, every atmospheric reading, every microfracture, and determined this was the optimal outcome. That was the difference. The system made a calculation. Elias Moreno made a decision. He sprinted, not away, not toward safety, but toward the door. The Greltic were roaring, high-frequency resonance blasts that made nearby screens flicker. The juvenile Asgan was huddled against the wall, shuddering with every pressure fluctuation. Elias didn't know what he could do, but he wasn't going to let the door close with them still inside. He reached it with a half-second to spare. The descending bulk of the door shrieked in its final drop, designed to crush, to seal, to end. Elias threw himself under it, turned, braced his legs, and thrust his palms upward. The world cracked. The first force reading came in from sensor node 44 Kappa. Obstruction detected. Compression delay anomaly. The system flagged it for review, but did not stop. The door's motor increased torque by 15%. That was standard. Push through luggage. Minor detritus. At 28%, it still read obstruction. The human was still holding it. Elias didn't feel like he was holding anything. It felt like the universe was trying to erase him, inch by inch, like the weight of inevitability pressing through steel. His arms trembled. Shoulders tore with heat, bone ground against bone. The reinforced edge of the blast door had a yield rating sufficient to crush titanium struts. It didn't matter. He held it anyway. One foot slipped. He jammed it back into position, heel grinding against floor plating. Somewhere in his back, something cracked. He screamed. It wasn't heroic. It was raw, ugly, primal. And through that sound, he saw the Azkin move. Stumble, rise, lurch toward him. On the other side of the transparent bulkhead, a dozen aliens watched. The lead safety officer, a Chanhari logistics strategist, tilted her frilled head. "Life signs terminated," said the medical AI beside her. "That human is dead," said a second voice. But Elias was screaming. Sensors lit up. The blast door motor surged to 62% torque, then 81. Readings spiked. Magnetic stabilizers shrieked. A subroutine tripped a failure alert. Counterforce exceeds safety margin. The door paused. It had never done that before. Inside the corridor, the Greltic surged forward, dragging the Tillich between them. They shouted something at Elias, who didn't understand the language. His feet slipped again. He redoubled. The Azken was crying now. That much he understood. From the control deck, engineers stared in confusion. The door was reporting resistance equivalent to a triple armature servobot, but no machinery could survive that torque. They zoomed the visual feed. Frame by frame, they watched the human not crushed, not flat, not dead, still holding. "Override?" someone asked. "Risk too high," the Chanhari snapped. "If the door retracts, and we lose pressure across ring corridor H, we breach outer shell. 1,000 lives." "He's buying time," another said. "He's already dead." Unquote. Visual feed says otherwise. Visual feed is glitching. Elias couldn't hear them. All he heard was blood roaring in his ears, and the door screaming in steel above him. His body was past pain, past logic, but not past purpose. He shouted, "Move!" It came out as a bellow, ripped from lungs crushed by airless tension. The aliens behind him heard it. The Azkin, gasping, launched herself down the corridor. The Tillich stumbled after her. One Greltic lost footing. The other caught him. 5 beings cleared the zone. Elias's knees buckled. The door dropped an inch. Then another. The safety officer made her decision. Emergency override. "Confirmed," the AI said. The motor reversed. It groaned, protested, fought itself, but it obeyed. The door, now visibly warped, retracted with a reluctant shriek. Pressure stabilizers hummed. Sensor feeds fluctuated wildly. And then, the door locked open. Elias collapsed. His body didn't fall with grace. It slumped sideways like a broken scaffolding, every joint rebelling at once. He hit the floor face first and didn't move. Med teams swarmed the corridor seconds later, suits hissing. The first to reach him checked vital signs, then double-checked, then yelped through the comms. "He's alive?" The medical AI refused to update its status. "Negative. No human can survive." "Shut it up and get a stretcher." On the other side of the observation glass, silence reigned. No one spoke, no one moved. They just stared at the replay, already looping on a dozen monitors. The blast door, the human, the impossible. In the security feed center frame, frozen mid-motion, Elias Moreno's arms were up. His face was twisted in effort. The door was pressing down, and for 10 full seconds, the system had read him as a malfunction. 10 seconds of refusal, 10 seconds of the impossible. And the system, flawless for decades, had blinked. The safety doctrine would be reviewed. The engineers would pore over data. The medics would whisper. But in that first moment, there was only one thought crossing every alien mind. The human held the door. What else could they hold? Elias didn't dream, not in the usual sense. There were fragments, a sensation of burning, of steel slicing air, of something too large pressing against his spine. There were voices, screams at first, then muffled tones, then nothing. Then light. Then dark. The first real thing he remembered was the scent of antiseptic. It was faint, sterile, with the telltale chemical trace used across species to denote cleanliness without aggression. He opened his eyes to a ceiling made of soft pulsing lights. Hexagonal panels. A design choice that suggested modular medical units. A transit hub clinic, maybe. Or a biostabilization pod. His throat burned. Every joint in his body pulsed with a low-grade throb. Not sharp pain, but insistent, real. That surprised him. He'd expected worse. Patient is regaining consciousness. The voice came from somewhere to his left. Calm. Not human. Vitals stabilizing. Cardiac rhythm with intolerable variance. Pulmonary strain elevated. Initiating mild suppressant. 30. Something hissed near his neck. Elias grimaced. Don't sedate me. A pause. Then a different voice answered. This one with more inflection. Female. Not human either, but close enough to carry emotion. You were supposed to be dead. He turned his head, slowly, and saw her. She stood at the edge of the room, tall and narrow, with fine ridges along her scalp that shimmered faintly under the lights. Pale gray skin, long limbs, and a posture that leaned slightly forward as if evaluating him like a curious specimen. Her uniform bore the insignia of Tonorous Emergency Oversight. Sorry to disappoint, Elias muttered. She stepped closer. Do you remember what you did? He blinked, thought, then nodded. The door. There were people trapped. Not people, she corrected. Aliens. Same difference. He tried to sit up and instantly regretted it. Every tendon in his back screamed. She didn't offer help. You interfered with an active containment protocol. That door was designed to isolate a pressure breach capable of hull-wide cascade. You inserted your body into a kinetic kill zone. You contradicted every emergency response doctrine engineered over 60 years. He breathed through clenched teeth. I saw someone still inside. That corridor was marked for sacrifice. You knew that. Everyone did. I didn't know them. I just saw someone moving. It wasn't a decision. I just moved. She stared at him, unreadable. We've analyzed the footage, reviewed the logs. Your resistance force was measured at over 6 kilonewtons. That's not possible. Elias raised an eyebrow. It happened. Your bones should have snapped. Your lungs should have collapsed. The medical AI declared you clinically deceased 3 times before visual feeds overruled it. Sounds like a bug in the system. No, she said. You were the bug. In the upper tiers of the transit hub, 36 alien officials had convened in an impromptu incident review chamber. What was once a diplomatic observation deck now buzzed with analysts, engineers, and safety doctrine enforcers, all trying to do the same thing. Understand. Across the central table, a Greltic engineer pounded one of his limb stubs against the surface. You can't fight the door. That's the point of the door. It fought back, said a calmer voice. A Tilic systems auditor, with pale, translucent skin and 4 blinking translator nodes attached to her throat. More accurately, it hesitated. Doors don't hesitate. Correct. They don't. He made it hesitate. Screens around the room showed looping footage. Frame by frame, they tracked Elias's body, shuddering under pressure, tracked the motor's torque increase, tracked the anomalous power draw, tracked the final override signal issued at the very edge of catastrophic system divergence. A Chonhari systems theorist gestured to the data stream. We have no modeling for this. There's no entry in the kinetic resistance variables for human torso. We've input rigid foam, hardened alloys, even plasma-sheared debris. Nothing lasts more than 4 seconds at that pressure. He lasted 11. Then he died. No, said another voice, this one low and gravelly. A Zenthok medic, deep blue in hue, gestured at a biometric feed. He didn't die. His body began the death process, but it never finished. Silence settled. Meaning what? Someone asked. Meaning, the medic said. His biology rewrote its limits on the fly. His pain receptors flooded. His endocrine system overloaded. Muscular and skeletal interfaces reached degradation thresholds we've never cataloged. But he didn't stop. Something in the human nervous system decided now was not an acceptable time to die. Quote, not. Someone whispered, that's not science. That's mythology. Maybe both, the medic said. Meanwhile, Elias sat in his recovery unit, drinking something that claimed to be broth, but tasted like powdered moss. The clinic had refused to release him, citing a half-dozen microfractures and suspected cartilage damage in both shoulders. His spine was bruised. His rib cage was a disaster. But he was alive and bored. The Askan child came to see him first. She didn't speak her kind, required aquatic translators for proper dialogue, but she brought a small metallic orb, glowing faintly. When she handed it to him, it pulsed in his hand, sinking briefly to his heartbeat. A resonance gift, said one of the medical staff. A token of survival. She looked at him with eyes that glimmered, then bowed once and left. Next came the Greltic pair. One had a limp, the other carried the data crate. They said nothing either, just saluted in their species gesture, a slow click of the lower thorax followed by a backward step. Elias nodded in return. Then came the officers. By now, rumors had spread. Half the station knew. The other half had theories. Engineers were still arguing whether Elias had deployed some hidden exosuit or nanofiber brace. Security staff had begun running checks on all humans aboard, trying to recalibrate safety procedures. The woman with the ridged scalp, her name was Sci-Fi, returned with a new datapad. We've updated protocol designations, she said. Effective immediately. Human presence invalidates automated safety assumptions. No kinetic doors will close without cross-confirmed biometric assessment if a human is detected within 40 meters. Elias stared at her. You changed the rules? Your actions revealed a blind spot, an oversight in our response logic. You exploited it. Aspasoded. Say, I wasn't trying to exploit anything. Exactly. She placed the datapad on his table. A single line glowed across the top. Incident classification. Human intervention event. Sci-Fi hesitated, then sat. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, finally, you didn't have to do it. That corridor was marked lost. Everyone accepted it. Ask. I didn't. But why? He looked at her, brow furrowed. Because they were still alive. Yes, but they were strangers. Aliens. You had no bond, no obligation. I had eyes, Elias said. I saw someone who needed help. That's enough. Sci-Fi looked at him as if he were radioactive. In her species, intervention without obligation was borderline incomprehensible. Calculated risk, yes. Exchange-based heroics, fine. But to suffer, bleed, and nearly die for strangers, across species lines, violated half a dozen cultural norms. She stood slowly. You scared us, she said. Elias blinked. What? You didn't just hold the door, you held a system. You resisted a decision made by logic, by consensus, by design. It wasn't just strength, it was disobedience to inevitability. And now, we have to account for that. I didn't mean to scare anyone. That, she said, is exactly what scares us. Down in engineering tier 3, 2 techs were still replaying footage of Elias's moment beneath the door. Not for failure analysis anymore. For something else. Look at his face, one said. The pain, the terror. Yeah? And he didn't stop. Would you have? I wouldn't even have turned around. Exactly. They watched it again. The human stepping forward, the others fleeing, the door descending, the impossible hold. A third technician walked in, saw what they were doing, and grunted. You're still watching that? We're not watching, said the first. We're remembering. The technician scoffed, but stayed to watch. Later that night, Station Time Cycle 3.3 Elias finally got permission to walk, slowly. Supported by a hover frame, he moved through the recovery corridor, nodding to passing medical staff. He reached a window that looked down over the corridor where it had all happened. It was quiet now, cleaned, repaired, lit with calming blues, but the scorch marks on the floor near the base of the blast door hadn't been scrubbed out. Not entirely. A small plaque had been installed. Just a placeholder for now. It read, Sector H4 Delta, Incident Site, 1.1.7.3.4.2, Containment Failure. Resolved. Via human intervention. Elias stood there for a long time, staring. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a system anomaly. He just remembered the look in that Askan child's eyes, and he wondered what kind of universe needed a plaque to understand why that had mattered. Then he turned and limped back to bed. The Doctrine Review Committee met behind closed bulkheads. That, in itself, was normal. What wasn't normal was that every representative from the Safety Consortium's primary worlds showed up in person, physically, not via holo. That hadn't happened since the Drosak reactor incident, which had only killed 35. This was different. Elias Moreno hadn't died. And that was the problem. From an operational standpoint, it would have been easier if he had. A fatality would have fit the models. It would have been a tragic anomaly, certainly, but an understandable one. Heroism followed by structural failure. Martyrdom by miscalculation. Something noble, perhaps, but ultimately absorbable by the system. Instead, the system had bent. And worse, it had bent publicly. Across Tonnery Station, whispers traveled faster than data packets. The phrase, "he held the door," was becoming a refrain, a shorthand among species without shared syntax. Street vendors repeated it like a proverb. Commuters turned their heads when humans passed. And for the first time in consortium history, dozens of alien cultures, all with independent linguistic roots, began forming a common idiom around a single Terran event: human intervention. At the doctrine table, the implications were more disturbing. A Denari thought advisor flicked his fronds irritably. "We're not here to mythologize the human," he said. "We're here to determine procedural response. What protocols failed?" Across from him, a shell-armored Joxari intelligence modulator ran a claw over the tabletop, bringing up the incident timeline again. It zoomed into the exact moment when blast door H4 Delta encountered resistance, then stalled at torque ceiling. 11.2 seconds of system error. "That is not a protocol failure," the Joxari rasped. "That is a behavioral null space. No logic tree predicted manual obstruction. No kinetic resistance forecast included meat as a counterforce." "You say that like it makes sense," the Denari muttered. "It does make sense. The human body is not rated for those thresholds. It cannot do what it did. Therefore, we did not plan for it. Then maybe we need to start." Silence fell. A small, soft-voiced Zenthok medic, seated near the edge of the table, finally spoke up. "You misunderstand the core problem," she said. "This isn't about strength. It's about contradiction. He made the system feel indecisive. He violated the logic of inevitability." "Explain," someone prompted. "Everything we build, the doors, the evacuation hierarchy, the AI adjudication layers, they're all based on binary assumptions. This corridor is safe. That one is not. Close the door. Sacrifice the trapped. Minimal acceptable loss." He didn't agree. He resisted not just the force of the door, but the philosophy of the door. There were no rebuttals. Meanwhile, Elias was learning to walk again. He didn't like it. The medics had cleared him for mobile recovery, a cautious term that basically meant he could limp, swear, and collapse in new locations, as long as a drone followed him with stimulants. They'd installed a passive shoulder brace to help support his damaged joints. It itched badly. He ignored it. Instead, he spent most of his time near the public concourse, watching people, aliens, mostly. Most wouldn't approach, but they looked. A sideways glance here, a polite hesitation there. Greltic younglings stared openly. A Zenthok trader had offered him half a cube of polished onyx in what Elias later learned was an act of formal reverence. No one ever said it directly, but the awe was there. Unsettling, as if what he'd done wasn't brave, but unnatural, disobedient to physics. A few even kept their distance. He couldn't blame them. From their perspective, he had violated something sacred, safety systems that were supposed to be beyond question. He tried to explain it once. A translator drone hovered beside him, relaying his voice into polyharmonic speech patterns. "I didn't break the rules. I just acted before they applied." The drone buzzed. A crowd of 3 alien youths listened carefully. "That is not how the system is designed," one replied. "I didn't mean to contradict it," Elias said. "But if someone's in danger and I can do something, then I'll do something, even if the system disagrees." The smallest of the 3 tilted its head. "So you reject logic?" No, Elias said. I add humanity. They left quietly after that. He never knew what they thought. Elsewhere on the station, Sci was drowning in reports, footage requests, analysis requests, cultural consultation flags, and a dozen flagged memes flooding local data space. Somehow, someone had converted the moment Elias braced under the door into a hollow loop sculpture. Now it was being duplicated and displayed in transit lounges. She hated how quickly the story was spreading, not because it was false, but because it was true, and no one knew what to do with it. He'd rewritten what was possible. That kind of thing didn't stay local. She brought up a private file, not official, a raw snippet of corridor audio captured by a secondary maintenance node, unregistered by the public security grid. She played it again. "Move!" Elias had screamed. His voice cracked with effort, with pain, but also with command. It didn't matter that none of the aliens understood English. They moved anyway. Somehow, they knew. Somehow, the intent had transcended translation. Sci shut the file, leaned back in her seat. Her ancestors believed that some words carried force. That meaning could shape outcome. She never believed it, until now. The humans, for their part, were late to the story. Earth was distant. Terran media had only just received word of the incident. When it broke, reactions were mixed. Most of humanity treated it as a feel-good anomaly. A few outlets ran think pieces. The door that blinked. Kinetics versus kindness. One popular commentator called Elias the man who held reality like a gym bar. Another suggested his actions had exposed a flaw in alien ethics, prompting brief outrage from consortium species. But the real effect didn't show up in headlines. It showed up in station hiring applications. Over the next 2 weeks, a 400% increase in human applicants flooded into the Transit Authority's outer sector postings. Most cited desire to assist or willingness to problem solve under pressure. She had. A private memo circulated among hiring committees. Note, humans may introduce unpredictable variables under strain. Situational awareness is both asset and liability. Recommend pairing with logic-bound species during high-stress shifts. Do not assign to kinetic control systems without redundancy layers. The memo was eventually redacted, but not before Sci read it. She didn't laugh, but she did exhale sharply. 3 weeks after the incident, Elias was summoned. He entered the oversight chamber wearing civilian clothes, baggy, rumpled, and completely inappropriate by consortium standards. No formal greeting, no posture bow, just a man still walking stiffly, still clearly in pain, but upright. That alone unsettled several delegates. Sci gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Moreno," said the Joxari chair, "you've been cleared for station departure. Your injuries are officially catalogued as survivable, with no long-term impact expected on your basic function. We thank you for your cooperation during recovery." You ask. Elias nodded. "Okay. You are free to return to your previous duties, or should you wish to file for reassignment within the Taneris region, compensation has been arranged." "Okay," Elias said again. Several aliens exchanged glances. Finally, the Denari leaned forward. "Do you have any questions about the incident? Any perspective you'd like to offer?" Elias considered. "I held a door," he said. "I saw someone needed help, and I held a door. It wasn't complicated. You're making it complicated." "It is complicated," Sci said softly. "Only if you expect people to follow rules more than they follow empathy." The room fell quiet. A few minutes later, Elias left. Sci remained behind. The others filtered out slowly, systems still recalibrating around something they couldn't quite name. Not strength, not defiance. Something else. A new variable, one not defined by systems or thresholds, but by choice. 3 months passed. Taneris Station was quiet again. The pressure sensors had been recalibrated. Blast door systems had been triple audited. Containment protocols now included 12 new conditional branches, all stemming from one event. Most were never triggered. A few never could be. But they were there. And in fine print at the bottom of every newly printed emergency manual, one small footnote had been added in gray consortium standard text. If human presence is detected within response range, override protocols must be reviewed manually. Human judgment may supersede automatic response. The phrasing had taken 14 hours of debate. Salari had fought for may instead of must. It was the only compromise the others would accept. They were still afraid of the precedent, still shaken by the simplicity of the moment that had undone their complexity. On the outer ring of the station, in a lesser-used corridor, the repaired blast door stood unchanged, except for a narrow strip of metal inset beside it. No display, no animation, just a plaque, engraved in both standard and Terran English. Here, a human held the door. Lives continued because choice outran calculation. Station visitors often passed it without noticing. Some stopped. A few took pictures. A handful left small offerings, a charm, a folded note, a hand-pressed leaf from a far colony. The cleaners didn't remove them, not anymore. Elias Moreno didn't stay on Tenerife. He turned down the reassignment offer, politely refused every interview request, ignored the documentary pitches, the biographical profile drafts, and the commemorative sculpture design that someone thought was flattering but looked suspiciously like him being flattened. He just signed the discharge form, nodded to Salari, and booked transit on the next outbound vessel. She met him at the dock before departure. "You're leaving," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Too many people watching," Elias replied. "Feels weird." "Done. You could stay. We could use you." "Doing what? Holding doors?" Salari smiled, barely. "Not many of those left. We've updated the tolerances." Elias shrugged, shifting his duffel bag over one shoulder. "Good. Shouldn't have needed holding in the first place." She stepped forward. "What you did, it changed things. More than I can explain. Not just the protocols, not just the philosophy. We had a category for unexpected biological behavior. But now we have a new one. What's it called?" She looked at him. "Human interference class. Compassion-based variable." Elias groaned. "That sounds like a disease." She didn't answer. "Do me a favor," he added. "Don't turn it into a story. Not one with meaning. Anyway, I'm not a symbol. I'm just a guy who didn't think before he moved." "But that's exactly what makes it a story," she said. "Then make it a quiet one." The quiet didn't last. In the decades that followed, more incidents emerged. Not all involved humans, but every now and then, systems built to be absolute found themselves challenged by the soft illogic of empathy. A human maintenance tech delayed a temperature lockdown to retrieve a panicked molting Nurex hatchling. A Terran medic risked vacuum exposure for 8 seconds to keep pressure on a bleeding wound while the sealant gel deployed. A freighter captain ignored a cease order to haul a broken support drone out of a collapsing hangar. Each time, safety systems logged the action as a fault. Each time, lives were saved anyway. By the time Earth earned a full vote in the consortium assembly, the term human judgment clause had entered official language, not as praise, not as condemnation, just as fact. It was something you had to account for. On a humid trade station in the Ventari Fold, a young Chonhari technician studied her emergency systems manual. She was nervous. First day on her first off-world post. The manual was thick, filled with decision trees and system redundancies. Page 77 held a highlighted section. Note: in multi-species environments, override systems may require manual review in cases involving Terran personnel. If human presence is confirmed within threshold range of kinetic isolation zones, pause closure sequence for 1.2 seconds and conduct real-time biometric reevaluation. She frowned. At the bottom, a citation. Tonneris Door Protocol Adjustment Incident 1.73.42 Human Intervention Event. Curious, she searched for the incident footage. It wasn't restricted. The core clip had gone archival a long time ago. She watched in silence. The human ran. The door fell. He caught it. The camera wasn't artistic. The feed was raw, utilitarian, and slightly jittery, but it captured everything. The trembling muscles. The scream. The moment when the system stalled, confused by a contradiction it couldn't resolve. And then the corridor cleared. The override engaged. The human collapsed. At the end of the clip, the audio looped just before the impact threshold. One word. Move. The technician sat back, quiet. She didn't fully understand it, but she logged it in memory. not because she expected it to happen again, but because she suddenly knew it could. Years later, Elias lived quietly on a moon colony near the Helix Rift. He didn't work on doors anymore. He repaired small transports, cleaned out coolant lines, fed stray animals that nested in the landing bays. People didn't recognize him. He liked it that way. His shoulders still ached when it rained, or whatever passed for rain on a methane-heavy atmosphere. His back clicked in new ways. Once a week, he soaked in a chemical bath that smelled like engine degreaser, but he was fine. He didn't watch the news, didn't check the system logs, but sometimes, just sometimes, he'd hear about an incident, a rescue,